My name is Samuel Coleman. I'm writing this down, every last detail I can drag out of my memory, because I need to. Not for fame, not for pity, but because if I don't, I think the silence will finally swallow me whole. And maybe, just maybe, if someone reads this, they'll understand. Or, at least, they'll know not to take the night shift at the Ozark Jubilee Fun Park. Not ever. It all started 3 months ago. Times were tough, as they say. My hours at the lumber mill had been cut back to nearly nothing, and the bills, well, they don't stop coming, just because your paycheck does. My wife, Sarah, was trying to pick up extra shifts at the diner, but it was still a struggle. So, when I saw the ad in the local paper, Night Security Officer wanted, Ozark Jubilee Fun Park, reliable individual, minimal experience required. It felt like a lifeline. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. And the thought of quiet nights, just me, and the crickets patrolling an empty amusement park, it sounded almost peaceful. A far cry from the screaming saws and choking dust of the mill. Ozark Jubilee Fun Park. It wasn't one of those mega parks you see advertised on national television, like Magic Springs over in Hot Springs. No. Jubilee was smaller, older, nestled in a valley a few miles off the main highway, surrounded by dense Ozark woods. It had seen better days, even before it closed for the season. Faded paint peeled from the carousel horses, their grins looking more like grimaces in the harsh daylight. The roller coaster, the timber rattler, was a hulking wooden skeleton against the sky, its tracks streaked with rust. It had that air of forgotten joy, a place where laughter had slowly given way to silence and decay. During the summer, it probably still managed to draw a decent crowd of locals and the odd tourist, but come October, it shut down tight until spring. My job was to make sure it stayed that way. No vandals, no adventurous teenagers looking for a thrill. Mr. Henderson, the park manager, was a portly man with a calm, over and a perpetually worried expression. He handed me a hefty ring of keys, a surprisingly dim flashlight, and a list of duties that mostly involved checking locks and making sure the perimeter fence was secure. "It's real quiet out here, Sam," he'd said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Most nights, nothing happens. Just keep your eyes peeled, you know. Old parks like this, they make noises." He chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. Wind in the rides, critters skittering about. Don't let it spook ya. The first few weeks were exactly as advertised, quiet. Eerily quiet, sometimes. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, making the smallest sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of a loose sign in the wind, seem amplified, almost deliberate. I'd do my rounds. The crunch of my boots on the gravel, path's the lightest noise for miles. The park at night was a different beast altogether. The cheerful colors of the game's stalls looked garish and unsettling under the cold moonlight. The funhouse, with its leering clown face entrance, was particularly unnerving. Its painted smile seemed to widen in the shadows, its eyes following me as I passed. The main office, a small, prefabricated building near the entrance, was my home base. It had a desk, a creaky chair, and a bank of outdated CCTV monitors that showed grainy, black and white images of various points in the park. Most of them were fuzzy, and a couple were just static. Mr. Henderson had said they were more of a deterrent than anything. It was about the third week in that things started to feel off. Not overtly threatening, just wrong. I'd be walking my road, the same route I walked every night, and I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind that tells you you're being watched. I'd spin around, flashlight beam, cutting through the darkness, but there was never anything there. Just the looming shapes of the rides and the deep, impenetrable shadows of the surrounding woods. Then came the sounds. Not the usual creaks and groans of an old park settling in for the night. These were different. A faint, tinny carousel tune, seemingly coming from the Jubilee Carousel in the center of the park, even though the power was cut to all the rides. I'd race over, heart hammering, but the carousel would be still and silent, the painted horses frozen in their eternal gallop. Once I heard what sounded like a child's giggle, soft and distant, near the kiddie coral area. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe some animal I wasn't familiar with. The Ozarks are full of strange noises at night. I started to dread my patrols of the Pioneer Frontier section. It was at the far end of the park, backed right up against the thickest part of the woods. It was themed like an old frontier town, with a fake saloon, a general store, and a lost miner's cavern dark ride. The air always felt colder back there, the silence heavier. The trees seemed to press in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the dilapidated wooden facades. One night, as I was checking the lock on the saloon door, I heard a distinct thump from inside, like something heavy had been dropped. I froze, flashlight aimed at the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and shaky even to my own ears. "Anyone in there?" Silence. I waited, every nerve ending screaming. Finally, I worked up the courage to unlock the door and peek inside. Dust motes danced in my flashlight beam. Empty tables, overturned chairs, the long bar coated in a thick layer of grime. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched was so intense in there. I backed out and locked the door, my hands trembling. I tried to rationalize it all. Mr. Henderson was right. Old parks made noises. My mind was probably playing tricks on me, tired from the odd hours and the solitude. I even mentioned some of it to Sarah, trying to make light of it. "This old park, it's got more creaks than my grandpa's knees," I'd said. She'd smiled, but her eyes were worried. "Just be careful, Sam. Please." The incident, as I started calling it in my head, happened on a Tuesday. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden, making the park darker than usual. I was in the office, trying to get one of the CCTV monitors to show a clearer picture of the Timber Rattler entrance when I saw it. A flicker of movement on screen 4, which covered the midway near the Ferris wheel. It was quick, a shadow detaching itself from another shadow, too large to be a raccoon or an opossum. I leaned closer, squinting. The image was terrible, full of static, but I could have sworn it looked tall and thin. My heart started to pound. Vandals. I grabbed my big mag light and headed out, my radio crackling uselessly, as it often did in certain parts of the park. As I approached the Ferris wheel, its massive skeletal frame silhouetted against the murky sky, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. It was colder here, a damp, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The midway was deserted, the game stalls shuttered, their faded prizes barely visible through the grimy glass. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scraping sound. Scrape, drag. Scrape, drag. It was coming from behind the ring toss booth. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. This is park security. I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. Come out with your hands up. The scraping stopped. Silence descended again, thick and suffocating. I took a tentative step forward, then another. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I rounded the corner of the booth, and that's when I saw them. 3 long, deep gouges in the asphalt. Each one was about 2 feet long and an inch wide, as if something incredibly heavy with 3 massive claws had been dragged across the ground. They were fresh. The edges were still sharp, the asphalt dust still settled around them. My blood ran cold. No animal I knew of in Arkansas could make marks like that. Not a bear, not a cougar. This was something else. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness around me. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now, a physical pressure against my skin. I felt naked, exposed. The scraping sound started again, this time from my left, near the darkened entrance of the haunted hayride barn. Scrape, ape, drag. Closer this time. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, faster than I thought I could, back towards the relative safety of the office. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that whatever had made those marks was still out there. And it knew I was there too. The peace I'd initially sought in the quiet of the night shift had curdled into something terrifying. Mr. Henderson was wrong. It wasn't just the wind and the critters. Something was terribly wrong at Ozark Jubilee Fun Park. And I had a horrifying feeling that my quiet nights were over. The next few nights were a blur of heightened anxiety and forced bravado. I told myself the claw marks were some kind of prank. Maybe kids with a crowbar or something. But the explanation felt hollow even to me. The sheer size and depth of doges spoke of something far more powerful than a couple of teenagers. I started carrying a heavy wrench from the maintenance shed along with my flashlight, though I knew deep down it wouldn't do much good against whatever I was starting to imagine lurking in the shadows. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. During the day, images of those marks would flash in my mind, and at night, every creak of the park, every rustle in the trees, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I found myself jumping at shadows, my head constantly on a swivel. The CCTV monitors in the office, once a source of mild boredom, became my obsession. I'd stare at their grainy, flickering images for hours, searching for any sign of movement, any anomaly. The park, which had once seemed merely dilapidated and melancholic, now felt actively malevolent. a hunting ground waiting for night to fall. The scraping sound became a regular companion. Scrapey, drag. Sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close. It seemed to toy with me, echoing from different parts of the park, always just out of sight. I never saw what made it, but the sound itself was enough to make my skin crawl. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stone on stone, or like something enormous sharpening its claws. I started to think about the local legends. The stories old timers sometimes told about creatures in the Ozark Hills. Tales of the Gauro, a reptilian beast with a taste for livestock, or the Snoffus, an elusive, deer-like creature with unnatural powers. I'd always dismissed them as folklore, campfire stories. Now, I wasn't so sure. The deep woods surrounding the park suddenly seemed less like a scenic backdrop and more like a hiding place for things unknown. One particularly dark night, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the park in an oppressive, silent shroud. Visibility was down to a few feet. It was the kind of night where the world shrinks to the small circle of your flashlight beam, and everything beyond it is a mystery. I was doing my patrol near the log jamboree flume ride, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood and stagnant water. The ride's massive, like channels were slick with moss, and the animatronic lumberjacks and bears that dotted its course looked grotesque in the fog, their painted smiles like deathly rictuses. That's when I heard a new sound. A low guttural growl, like a very large animal, but with a strange, almost metallic resonance to it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a dog. It was something else. It came from the direction of the dense thicket that separated the log jamboree from the park's perimeter fence. My hand tightened on the wrench. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The only answer was another growl, closer this time, followed by the snapping of twigs. Panic seized me. I knew with absolute certainty that I was being hunted. This wasn't a chance encounter. This thing, whatever it was, knew I was there, and it was coming for me. I turned to flee, but in the disorienting fog, I stumbled, my foot catching on an exposed tree root. I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my grasp and extinguishing as it hit the ground. The wrench clattered away into the darkness, plunged into near total blackness. I scrambled on my hands and knees, desperately feeling for the flashlight. The growling was louder now, accompanied by heavy, rhythmic breathing. I could smell it too, a rank, musky odor, like wet fur and something else. Something acrid, like rusted metal. My fingers closed around the cool metal of the flashlight. I fumbled with the switch, my hands slick with sweat and dirt. It flickered, then came on, its weak beam cutting a swath through the fog. And then I saw it. Or, at least, part of it. Not 20 feet away. Half concealed by the swirling mist and the skeletal branches of the undergrowth were two eyes. They were large, round, and glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light, like dying embers. They weren't animal eyes, not any animal I'd ever seen. There was an intelligence in them, a cold, predatory focus that was utterly terrifying. Below the eyes, I could just make out a massive, dark shape, low to the ground, too indistinct in the fog to discern any clear form. But it was big. Far bigger than any black bear. The creature let out a soft chuffing sound, almost like a sigh, and took a step forward. I saw a glint of something long and curved catch the light from my flashlight, a claw, thick as my thumb and wickedly sharp. The claw marks. I didn't think. I just reacted. I scrambled to my feet and ran, blindly, away from those glowing eyes, away from that horrifying sound and smell. I crashed through bushes, branches whipping at my face, the fog disorienting me. I could hear it behind me, moving with a speed that belied its bulk. It's heavy. Footfalls surprisingly quiet on the soft earth, punctuated by those awful growls and the scrape, drag of its claws. I burst out of the thicket and onto one of the main pathways near the Galaxy Spinner ride. The fog was a little thinner here, and I could see the skeletal outline of the ride against the sky. I risked a glance behind me. The yellow eyes were still there, gaining on me. Desperate, I ducked into the control booth of the Galaxy Spinner. It was a tiny, cramped space, reeking of stale cigarettes and mildew. I slammed the flimsy door shut and fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy with terror. The lock clicked just as a tremendous force slammed into the door, making the whole booth shake. The wood splintered around the frame. Another slam, and the door buckled inwards, the cheap lock groaning in protest. Through a crack in the warped wood, I saw one of Eye's yellow eye, peering in at me, unblinking, filled with a terrifying, alien hunger. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the floor. It knew I was in there. It was trapped with me, or rather, I was trapped with it just outside. I scanned the tiny booth frantically. There was no other way out. The window was just a small, sealed pane of glass. I was cornered. The creature outside slammed against the door again, harder this time. The hinges shrieked. One more hit, and it would be through. My eyes fell on the ride's control panel. It was old, covered in dust, but the main power lever was still there. An insane idea sparked in my terrified mind. The power to the rides was supposed to be off at the main breaker, but what if there was still some residual charge? What if the wiring to this specific ride was somehow different? It was a wild, desperate gamble. As the door began to splinter and crack open, revealing more of the monstrous form outside, a glimpse of dark, matted fur, a snout full of needle, sharp teeth, I lunged for the control panel. With a guttural cry that was half terror, half defiance, I yanked the main lever upwards. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening screech of protesting metal and a shower of sparks from the ancient motor, the Galaxy Spinner roared to life. Lights I hadn't seen lit in months flickered on around its base, casting a lurid, strobing glow on the scene. The ride itself began to groan and shudder, its arms starting to slowly, jerkily, rotate. The creature outside let out a deafening roar, a sound of rage and surprise, and recoiled from the sudden noise and light. I didn't wait to see more. As the door finally gave way, I scrambled out the other side of the booth, the one now partially blocked by a slowly moving arm of the ride. I squeezed through the narrow gap, tearing my jacket, and sprinted into the fog. Choked night, the cacophony of the dying ride, and the enraged bellows of the creature echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the main office, my lungs burning, my body shaking uncontrollably. I slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. The galaxy spinner eventually ground to a halt, its lights dying one by one, plunging the park back into an even deeper silence. But I knew it wasn't over. I had seen it. It had seen me. The hunt was well and truly on, and I was the prey. The hours between my escape from the galaxy spinner and the gray light of dawn were the longest of my life. I huddled in the office, every nerve screaming. The image of those glowing yellow eyes burned into my retinas. I didn't dare make a sound. I kept the lights off, peering through the grimy window at the fog-shrouded park, expecting at any moment to see that monstrous shape emerge from the mist. The radio was useless, just static, and my cell phone had no signal that was deep in the valley. I was utterly alone, trapped with a creature that defied all reason. When the first hint of morning finally painted the eastern sky, I felt a sliver of hope. Surely this thing, whatever it was a creature of the night. Daylight would dry it back to whatever dark den it called home. With trembling hands, I wrote a hasty note for Mr. Henderson, Fanamar GNCY, Kan Wawar Tana GHT, YL Kal-El, and practically fled the park as soon as it was light enough to see my way to my truck. I didn't call. I couldn't. What would I say? Mr. Henderson, there's a monster in your amusement park, and it tried to eat me. They'd think I was insane. Maybe I was. The thought gnawed at me. Was this all some elaborate hallucination, brought on by stress and solitude? But the splintered door of the galaxy spinner, control booth, the deep gouges in the asphalt, those were real. My torn jacket was real. The terror was real. I spent the day in a daze, unable to eat, unable to think straight. Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. I tried to brush it off, but the fear was a living thing inside me, coiling in my gut. I knew I couldn't go back there. But the thought of leaving the park unguarded, of that thing roaming free, possibly venturing beyond the park's borders, and selfishly, I needed the money. We were desperate. Against all common sense, against every instinct screaming at me to run and never look back. I found myself driving back to Ozark Jubilee Fun Park as dusk began to settle. I told myself I'd just check in, make sure everything looked normal from the outside, then call Henderson and quit. But a darker, more primal part of me knew I was being drawn back. Maybe it was the need to understand, to confront what I'd seen. Or maybe, terrifyingly, the creature itself was drawing me back. This time, I came prepared. Or as prepared as a man can be against an unknown monstrosity. I had my grandfather's old hunting rifle, a .30-06, and a box of shells. It felt heavy and reassuring in my hands, though a cold knot of dread in my stomach told me it might be as useless as the wrench had been. The park was even more menacing than before. The fog had lifted, but the air was heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The usual night sounds were absent. No crickets, no owls. Just a profound, listening silence. As I approached the office, I saw the door was ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I'd locked it when I left. Rifle raised. I cautiously pushed the door open. The office was a wreck. Papers were strewn everywhere. The chair was overturned, and the CCTV monitors were smashed, their screens dark and shattered. And on the floor, more of those terrible 3-toed claw marks, deeper this time, gouged into the cheap linoleum. It had been here. It had been looking for me. A cold fury mixed with my fear. This thing wasn't just some dumb animal. It was intelligent. It was vindictive. It had trashed the office, a clear message. My sanctuary was gone. I knew then I couldn't just hide. It would find me. I had to face it, or at least try to get out of the park for good. The main gate was the closest way out, but I had a horrifying feeling it would be watching the most obvious escape route. My best bet was the service road at the far end of the park, beyond the pioneer frontier section, the same area where I'd first heard it. The journey across the park was a masterclass in terror. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen movement. Every gust of wind sounded like its guttural breathing. I moved slowly, carefully, rifle at the ready, trying to use the rides and stalls as cover. The Jubilee Carousel stood silent, its horses seeming to watch me with their dead, painted eyes. The funhouse clown's leer felt more personal, more knowing. As I neared the pioneer frontier, the air grew colder, the silence more profound. I could smell it again, that rank, musky odor, stronger now. It was close. Crept along the edge of the fake saloon, my back pressed against the rough wooden planks. The service road was just beyond the Lost Miner's Cavern, dark ride. Then, a sound from inside the dark ride. A soft, rhythmic thumping. My blood turned to ice. It was in there, waiting. I could try to bypass it, cut through the woods, but that felt even more dangerous. The woods were its territory. Here, at least, I had some limited visibility, some structures to maneuver around. Steeling myself, I decided the only way was through, or rather, past. I had to get to that service road. I took a deep breath and darted across the open space towards the entrance of the dark ride, planning to skirt its edge. As I did, a massive, dark shape exploded from the ride's entrance with terrifying speed. It was bigger than I remembered. A hulking silhouette against the faint starlight, easily 8 feet tall, at the shoulder. Its form a nightmarish blend of fur, scales, and something that looked like twisted metal, as if it had incorporated parts of the decaying park into its very being. Its yellow eyes blazed with fury. I didn't have time to aim properly. I brought the rifle up and fired, the shot echoing like a cannon in the enclosed space. The creature roared, a sound that was part animal, part screeching machinery, and stumbled. But it didn't go down. It lunged again. I scrambled backwards, firing again. This time I saw a chunk of dark fur and something metallic fly off its flank. It shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound, and faltered for a moment, giving me a precious second. I turned and ran towards the service road, daring to look back. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me, roaring in pain and rage. The service road was just ahead, a pale ribbon in the darkness. Freedom. Then, something snagged my ankle. I cried out as I was yanked off my feet, landing hard on the gravel. I twisted, kicking out, and saw a long, whip-like tendril, dark and glistening, retracting back towards the creature as it emerged from the trees, limping, but still coming. It wasn't just claws and teeth. It loomed over me, its fetid breath washing over my face. Those terrible yellow eyes stared down at me, filled with a cold, ancient malice. This was it. This was how I died. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But instead of tearing claws, I heard a new sound. A high-pitched whining, like stressed metal, growing rapidly louder. And then an ear-splitting CRSK, like a giant tree snapping in a storm, followed by a sound I knew all too well, the groan of stressed wood and the shriek of twisting metal. My eyes flew open. The creature was no longer looking at me. It was looking up, its head cocked, a strange, almost confused expression on its monstrous face. Above us, one of the massive, decaying support beams of the Timber Rattler roller coaster, weakened by years of neglect and possibly by the impact of my earlier, wild shots, was groaning, splintering, and then, with a final, agonizing tear, it gave way. The section of track it supported, tons of wood and steel, came crashing down directly onto the creature. There was a sickening, wet crunch, a final, choked-off roar, and then silence, save for the settling dust and the faint creak of the remaining coaster structure. I lay there for a long moment, stunned, covered in dirt and debris. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. The massive tangle of wood and steel lay like a fallen god. I couldn't see the creature. Beneath it, only a dark, viscous fluid seeping out from under the wreckage. I didn't wait to investigate. I grabbed my rifle, scrambled to my feet, and ran down that service road, as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. I didn't stop running until I hit the main highway, flagging down the first pair of headlights I saw. They found the park gates locked, just as I'd left them. The office was trashed, yes, but Mr. Henderson attributed it to vandals. There was no sign of the fallen roller coaster section. The Timber Rattler stood intact, a silent, skeletal sentinel against the morning sky, though a large section of its track looked suspiciously newer, less weathered than the rest. No claw marks on the asphalt. No splintered control booth door for the Galaxy Spinner. No sign of the creature. It was as if the park itself had reset, healed itself, erasing any evidence of my nightmare. They think I'm crazy, of course. Stress, exhaustion, an overactive imagination. I quit the job. Sarah and I are planning to move, to get as far away from Arkansas and that valley as we can. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. Sometimes late at night, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear it, a faint, distant scraping sound. Scrape, drag. And I know that thing, or something like it, is still out there. These old places, these forgotten corners of the world, they have teeth. And sometimes, they get hungry. The Ozark Jubilee Fun Park is still there, waiting for spring, waiting for the laughter. But I know what else it's waiting for. And I'll never sleep soundly again.